Cool. Go ahead and mute everybody. All right, so same thing. If you guys got questions, put them in the chat. So everybody, not everybody, but the people that did want to have a say in what to talk about, they asked for hormones. And hormones are tricky because my next question should have been, what do you guys want to know about hormones? And so I kind of worked on this presentation all day, going back and forth on what to talk about. And I think just to talk about general hormones would be short-sighted in the grand scheme of everything, because there's, I think, over 60 different hormones in the body, right? So when we talk about them, I think most people want to talk about like tests, and they want to talk about estrogen and thyroid and, you know, all those other ones. But and we will talk about those things, but it's a very complicated process to just say, well, let's talk about hormones. So what we're going to talk about tonight is going to be a little bit of what's called homeostasis. There's going to be a little bit of sciencey talk, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about hormones at the end, but it's going to be like a shortened and condensed type of discussion. Yeah. So Sean, I'm going to hang on to that if you're going to stick around to the end. If you don't stick around, I'll answer that, like how I would approach learning about that. So I need to clarify, I am not a doctor, not an endocrinologist. The endocrine system falls within the scope of practice as a strength and conditioning specialist. So I have an understanding of hormones and the system itself. Everything I'm presenting or will talk about can be found through strategic Google usage, okay? Always talk to a licensed healthcare practitioner in your state. So let's get this rolling here. Please present. All right. Okay. Give this a second. All right. So I think physiology. So when you go to school, we have anatomy and physiology, and anatomy is the study of like structures, the things that we can see on like a bigger scale. Physiology is kind of like everything we really can't see. It's down on like, it's all the processes inside of the body. Okay. And the most fundamental concept of like physiology is what is known as homeostasis. And this is what I want all of us to kind of keep in mind when anytime we're dealing with anything mentally or physically is homeostasis is a self-regulating process by which an organism maintains internal stability while adjusting to changing external conditions or your environment. So it's everything that our body does on the inside to keep us alive when we're surrounded by this ever-changing environment. All right, so there's all these processes that are happening right now. Like Sean, you're walking around, you're drinking a Monster, you're looking at your phone, like your body is doing a lot of things that we don't even necessarily realize to make sure you don't die in the environment you're in. So it's all about balance. So these are just a couple of things that are involved within homeostasis, like our core temperature, our blood glucose, electrolyte, fluid balance and blood pressure, your blood pH, gene regulation, energy balance, and a lot more. And all of these have a close set of ranges for which they must fall within, right? If your temperature gets too high and your body can no longer bring it down, it will throw off our homeostasis. All right, so the major players with our hormones is going to be, the first one is the nervous system. Nervous system is your brain and spinal cord and the nerves that come off of it. So we want to think of the nervous system as we have this brain here in the middle, and it kind of sits on top and is looking down and making sure everything's running right. We have nerves that run out of our spinal column to our limbs, and then from our limbs back into our spinal column up to our brain. So those nerves that are going into the spinal column are constantly evaluating the environment. They're constantly evaluating everything that's going on externally so we can keep us alive internally. That's the nervous system in like 2 sentences. Next is the endocrine system. Okay, so all of these are glands that are part of the endocrine system. They all produce hormones that they are used to communicate with various parts in the body. So the nervous system communicates within itself with what's known as neurotransmitters. So this is like dopamine, serotonin, and all of those other things. The endocrine system uses hormones. So these glands produce these chemical messengers to send out to other organs in the body to tell them to do things. Things is a very scientific term. The thing that is the oversees all of it, though, is the hypothalamus. Okay, it's this little, it is the size of a pea, and it controls everything within the nervous system. Like it does, to me, that is just, it's fucking wild, right? So the hypothalamus is this little thing in green, and then this little like scrotum looking thing underneath it is called the pituitary gland. So a lot of the communication goes hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, then it goes out to all of these other glands. Okay. And this is all done with what's called a feedback system. So the body's constantly monitoring things, and I'll give you a couple examples, but we have a negative and we have a positive. A negative feedback is when we want to oppose the stimulus that triggers it. And a positive is something we want to amplify. We want to make that stimulus bigger, right? So here's kind of how it works. So we have about 10 different types of receptors in our body: baroreceptors, mechanoreceptors, things that are just constantly monitoring things. And homeostasis is about balance. And anytime one of those receptors gets information that throws us off balance, it sends something up to the hypothalamus and sends it out into the body to put us back into homeostasis. Okay, so here's one of them. It's temperature regulation, right? So on the left is if we're hot, the sensory organs, they say, hey, oh man, the body temperature is rising. We need a response. We need to sweat. We need to cool the body down. Same with Homer here on the right. If it's cold, we have to constrict our blood vessels and we have to shiver. Okay, that's a negative feedback system. We want to oppose the stimulus that's triggering us. If we're too cold, we got to warm ourselves up. If we're too warm, we got to cool ourselves down. So let's look at one that's a little bit more intricate. Okay, is our blood sugar, right? So there's a normal range for blood glucose. It's anywhere from 60 to 90 milligrams per 100 milliliters. Those values don't necessarily matter, but when that blood sugar rises, we have to do something with that sugar within the body, right? So that's when the pancreas will release what's called insulin. And insulin and sugar work like a lock and key mechanism, right? The insulin opens up the cells so the sugar can come in. Now, when we have excess sugar, the body will store it in the liver and it'll store it in the muscles. But once those are topped off, it starts to store it in the body for energy down the road in body fat. But if our blood glucose falls, we can now get that sugar from the liver or our body cells, and the pancreas will release what's called glucagon, which is a hormone. This will cause the liver to break down glycogen, and it will release glucose until the blood glucose gets back to where it's at. So the receptors are always taking note of what's going on. Is the blood sugar good? Is it too high? Is it too low? Right? Do we need to eat? Right? We got to tell the hypothalamus, say, hey, we got to release these other hormones to tell them, hey, we need to go eat. And then now we'll look at that. So this is a negative feedback loop with the blood sugar, right? We want to oppose the stimulus. This is probably one of the only positive feedback loops is during pregnancy. We want to increase the stimulus, right? So what the body will actually release is oxytocin to help increase the amount of contractions and the intensity of those contractions. The more oxytocin it can release, the more contractions will happen and the intensity of them. This can be a problem though when they induce labor and they start to give hormonal oxytocin. The body's not going to produce it, so it can throw off that feedback loop. So now let's talk about hormones, right? They're just chemical messengers. It comes from the Greek word meaning that which sets in motion. It gets things done within the body. And this is the actual definition. It's only transported in the blood. So remember, the neurotransmitters are in the nervous system. Hormones are within everything else. So when you guys ask me, want to talk about hormones, here's all these are all hormones. And this isn't even all of them. This isn't even like an extensive list. And yes, vitamin D is a hormone, and we will talk about that in the next week or two. But as you can see, so even like melatonin, right, is a hormone. And we talk about homeostasis. Melatonin is a big one. This is something a lot of people take, right? Helps them fall asleep. But the body naturally produces melatonin. But what we have to look at is this balance. If we take too much melatonin and we wake up and it's still in our system, we're going to feel groggy. Then what do we take? We take caffeine, right? And then we play this game of balancing with things. You know, we take vitamin D. Well, if we take vitamin D, there's that balance. Same with testosterone, same with thyroid, same with all of these hormones. It's a balancing act to maintain homeostasis. So remember, homeostasis is to keep us alive based on our environment. I know you guys are probably sick of seeing this, but it is all going to go back down to this. So Sean, I'm going to stop sharing. So that's all I got for this right now. I didn't want to dive too deep into hormones. I just want to give a general overview about like homeostasis and like what hormones actually do. So then we can get a little bit more specific into what you're looking for. So when we get blood work done, right, we have to ask questions is why are things low? Why is my testosterone low? Why is thyroid low? What does thyroid do? Where is the thyroid hormone produced? What would cause it to do X, Y, and Z? But also what happens, you know, what's the environment doing? Now, Sean, your girl, she's got like a medical condition. That's going to be a little different than someone who's got like an environmental condition, right? But at the end of the day, like your girlfriend probably has to look at lifestyle factors for that. Obviously, there's medications that she probably is taking, and she's going to have, you know, situations that do come up, but we always look at the environment, right? Because we're trying to maintain balance, and that's what hormones do. They maintain balance. And when balance is thrown off, that's when we start to see disease processes, when things are off. So even from a mental health standpoint, you know, I want you guys to start thinking like, why does my body feel off today? You don't need to look into like the physiology or necessarily the hormones. Like the hormones just give you like, hey, if your thyroid or test is low, the question's still going to be, so what, now what? You're still going to have to do something about it. And whether that's hormone replacement or looking at your environment or, you know, everything else that's involved with that. You know, even from like a mental health standpoint with neurotransmitters, we have to, hey, why do I feel this way? Why did I react that way? And you don't necessarily need to know the neurotransmitters that are involved, but why am I off balance? Why is my homeostasis out of whack? Think of that as like your body trying to communicate something with you. Like if things are off, it's just your body trying to communicate. So start to, you know, and a lot of the stuff like the mental health, we can look back at like previous experiences, but we still need to do, okay, so what now? What are we going to do to move forward? So that's all I want to talk about on hormones. I will answer questions or we can have discussions about them if you have any specific questions. But yeah, that's all I got. I didn't want to dive too deep and without knowing what you guys wanted to talk about. All right. Ryan, you got a question, man?
Yeah, got a. What are some things environmentally that you could maybe set yourself up in more of like a, I guess, a positive hormonal state? That's a question.
So when we talk
That's even
about
possible.
like a hormonal state, right, we have to look at values, right? So they set these ranges for what they say 95% of the average person would have. There's values. So when you get blood work done, there's values, right? So there's no, I wouldn't say optimal. It's like when you go get your blood work done, what are the ranges of where you're at? So like if for example, your test is low, right? What could possibly cause that, right?
Mhm.
It could be poor sleep. It could be inadequate amount of like movement and exercise, right? It could be the things that we're eating. It could be stress, right? So we start to look at like, so like cortisol gets a bad name, but cortisol, our body wouldn't produce cortisol if it wasn't important. But if we have too much of one thing, it's going to affect other things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when we start to look at like, even with estrogen or insulin, you know, so like diabetes, right? That, so there's one that you're born with, there's not much we can do about it, but manage it. But then there's one type 2 where it's a diet and lifestyle factor. So we have to look at what you're eating. Are you moving? Are you getting adequate rest? What's your relationship with stress? And we start with those things, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Now, more specific, you know, it's then, you know, now if you're looking like, again, testosterone it's just the common one. We have to look at what causes testosterone production. You know what I mean? Steve,
Yeah.
what's up? I know you're new. I'm glad you made it onto the meeting. Go ahead, Rye. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. I agree. Like even like probably maybe like 6 months, maybe 6 months ago, I did my first like round of blood work, and like same like with my wife, and like I was even surprised. There was one topic of the blood work. It was called like the free testosterone,
Mhm.
and the guy said it was like through the roof. And he explained it to me that it was almost like just based on the type of red meat that I was eating. And because of that, like it's almost like overdoing or like cooking your liver almost. Like you're forcing your body to process this almost too much. It's
Yeah,
pretty
so that's out of my scope.
yeah.
You know, what's too much? What's your free number? You know, what could be too much? I'm not sure the process of what testosterone and the relationship it has with the liver. If other people in the group know, you can chime in, but there's an optimal range. I've never heard of a man having too much testosterone. I don't think that's I'm sure it's a medical condition, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing unless you're
No.
having effects from it, right? Like if everything else looks good, but then, do your liver enzymes look good? Right? That's another, if he says something like that.
True. Yeah.
Even like Sean with the thyroid, like what's the thyroid do? Why would the body need to produce it? Those are the questions I'm asking if I'm trying to learn about it, right? Why does the body produce the thyroid hormones? What do the thyroid hormones do? What does the body need to produce thyroid hormones? What affects my thyroid hormone? Those are the questions I would start asking to start researching for myself. Right. That was like, so like with us getting ready to have this kid, you start looking at like, they want to give them like for induction and things, they want to, Pitocin and oxytocin, they want to start giving her these hormones, but it can actually affect not only birth, but like the outcome for the child. Right. So there's things happen for a reason. And when, medicine's supposed to help us with that balance. It's addition and subtraction, right? When you have too much of one thing, it's going to offset it. So like vitamin D and vitamin K, right? Vitamin D is a hormone. If we have too much vitamin D, well, the K is going to go down, and we have to find like that nice balance. And that's with most supplements. There's going to be, that's why you should kind of research what you're putting into your body. That's why we should always look at environment. unless your hormones are really out of whack and we need to get something like going now. That's when, like, you know, like men, like, right, if your testosterone is like 200, we got to do something about it. Yeah, Sean. So when you have too much of test, so when is that what you're talking about in relationship to testosterone? Yeah, when you have too much supplemental test, it can affect your liver because you're producing too much. You're not supposed to have, that's not, you should be supplementing test if you actually have low testosterone, or if you're competing and you do it under the management of a doctor who knows what they're doing. I'm not a doctor, just a reminder.
I got another question for you, Nick.
Yeah, you can come.
Why do you think like thyroid issues, why does it seem like it affects women more than men? Or is that just a myth?
The first thing that pops to mind is birth control. I think birth control is one of the worst things that they ever did to women. I mean, it fucks with their hormones for a long time, and depending on how long they're on it for, you know, it can have some pretty. If a woman's been on birth control for a while, they want to get off, they need to talk to their doctor and come up with a plan. But that's
Like,
the first thing
you have to wean yourself off of it.
Yeah, I bet that's something you have to talk with your doctor, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind is birth control.
Interesting.
But I don't know for sure. I'm not, that would just be my initial guess. My wife would be a better one to answer that. But that's the one thing that sticks out in my head is that they don't have men on supplemental hormones. They're not taking hormones for their orally, right? Women do via birth control. So that would be what I would Google, the relationship between birth control and thyroid hormones. Because a lot of the females I've worked with, I'm not saying correlation and cause, it's just, so that would be a conversation for a doctor, or if you're interested, I would look at Google. There are, Susanna, maybe she can chime in, but I don't know. I don't know much about birth control. Sean, you want to elaborate on that last point there?
Just, I don't have a huge amount of elaboration. It's just what my girlfriend's endocrinologist has always been telling her. Because like she's asked so many questions about like, because Hashimoto's can affect guys and girls extremely different from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in all honesty, most guys that get Hashimoto's, they can kind of go unaffected, minus like during flare-ups and everything. Versus most girls that get it, like it'll literally drop them on their ass because it starts also affecting cycles, estrogen. There's one other major female hormone for the period cycle that it fucks around with too.
Yeah, there's like 3 estrogen hormones.
Yeah, it fucks up 2 of them.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying birth control and thyroid hormones have a greater effect on estrogen.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. But yeah, right. I don't know. That would be my first guess. That's the first thing I'll Google when we get off this call is the relationship between birth control and thyroid issues. Right. It's the same thing if guys supplement with test, right? It has, if you take too much and you take it for too long, and then it's going to have some detrimental effect because your body's like, we no longer need to do what we were made to do. We've got this coming in from somewhere else. Right. It's like, it's kind of, so this is what's wrong with like homeostasis. This is why I think it's hard for people to have like new habits, to create new habits. We like safety, we like security, we like balance, and trying to do new things can cause us to be off balance. It causes this disruption per se, you know, within our body. So same thing with like hormones, taking too much of one thing can affect other things. Cool. Any other questions? So I want you guys to think about that just for the week, right? That's the thought I want to leave you with is homeostasis, internal, and balance. If you feel off, right, take a step back and ask questions. Become an advocate for yourself and stop always outsourcing to everything. Like learn about your body. And I'm saying work with your practitioners, right? Don't give them, arm yourself with information, good information, and put the time in and research and study so you can learn about yourself, right? Learn about what hormones are and what they do within the body. Like, don't leave that. My wife's mom says, don't be those patients, just listen to your doctors. But we're just asking questions. And when I can't find answers to questions, I'm going to have to do some research. I don't like when doctors say, I don't know, like, this is just what we do. Like, sometimes it just doesn't sit well with me. I don't know if that's maybe me just being stubborn, and it's just the way I've just always questioned things. I did the same thing in strength and conditioning. I've always questioned the way we've done things. Yeah. So think about that. If you feel off, even mentally or physically, just ask questions and do some research and trying to figure things out for yourself. Learn about your bodies. Don't outsource your health to everybody that you lose touch with it. Remember, this isn't medical advice. This is just my opinion based on my experience. I'm not a doctor. But if you guys got no more questions, we'll cut it there. And we will talk about breathing and changing our physiological state. So how we can use our breath to amplify various parts of our nervous system to either excite it or calm it down. No, Sean, we can't say that. I just stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, right? Next week, we'll talk about breathing and our physiology, how we can use different breathing practices to elicit different types of states. So calmness, or we can excite it. So we can do some certain breathing things to excite our nervous system. And I think it's a pretty cool topic, and I think it's very powerful. So we talked about breath and mechanics a couple weeks ago. We're going to talk about breath and physiology inside next week. And then we'll come back to hormones. I'll ask in the group if anybody has any specific questions that they want to talk about on hormones. But they're just messengers, man. They're just telling people to do things in the body to keep balance. All right, y'all. Appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your night. If you have any questions, ask them in the group. And I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow and Thursday night. Bye.
Have a good.
Later.